Before Norton became a memory, before it became a revived badge on a modern factory wall, before it was bought, sold, rescued, and reborn. It was a sound, a hard mechanical note cutting through a British street, a polished tank catching the light outside a cafe, a racing single leaning into the bends of the Isle of Man, Commando idling with that heavy, uneven pulse that made the machine feel less like transport and more like something alive. For much of the 20th century, Norton was not just another motorcycle company. It was one of the names Britain used to describe its own engineering confidence. It came from Birmingham, from workshops where metal was shaped by hands, from drawings pinned above benches, from engines tested until weakness revealed itself, from roads where a good machine was not just admired, but trusted. Norton built motorcycles that became part of Britain's industrial imagination. They were fast, serious, beautifully handled, and deeply physical. They belonged to a world of oily hands, race circuits, draftsmen, mechanics, apprentices, and riders who understood that a motorcycle was never only a product. It was a relationship between a machine and the person willing to trust it, and yet, the company that helped define British motorcycling would be broken apart. Merged, rescued, revived, disgraced, sold, and reborn under foreign ownership. Its story begins with bicycle parts in 1898. It rises through the Isle of Man TT, the Featherbed frame, and the Commando. It falls into the wider collapse of the old British motorcycle industry. It returns as a heritage name. Then it returns again under TVS, after Norton's 2020 administration. So the question is not simply why Norton declined, the real question is harder. How did a company that understood speed so well fail, again and again, to keep pace with history? The story begins not with a superbike, but with a workshop. James Lansdowne Norton founded the company in Birmingham in 1898, at a time when the motorcycle itself was still being invented. The firm began by making bicycle fittings and parts, which placed it inside one of the most important technological transitions of the age. The bicycle had already changed personal mobility. The motorcycle promised to take that freedom further. But early motorcycling was not clean, refined, or predictable. It was experimental. Engines were small. Roads were rough. Frames still carried the memory of bicycles. A rider was exposed to weather, vibration, dust, mechanical failure, and the constant possibility that the machine beneath him might not be ready for what he was asking of it. In 1902, Norton produced the Energet, a small machine powered by a 143cc Clermont engine, mounted into a bicycle-style frame. By later standards, it looked fragile and primitive. But within that spindly machine was the basic promise that would shape Norton's future. The belief that steel, fuel, heat, and control could be turned into freedom. Those early motorcycles were not yet the thunderous machines enthusiasts would later worship. They were narrow, exposed, uncertain objects. But that uncertainty mattered. It meant the industry was still open. The rules had not hardened. The winning formula had not yet been decided. A small Birmingham company could still make its name if its machines could prove themselves where others failed. And in those years, proof did not come from marketing, it came from racing. For Norton, the Isle of Man TT became more than an event. It became a forge. In 1907, Rem Fowler won the twin-cylinder class of the inaugural Isle of Man TT on a Norton Peugeot. For a young company, that victory mattered far beyond the trophy. It placed the Norton name in front of riders who understood what racing meant in those days. A win was not decoration, it was evidence. The Isle of Man was dangerous, exposed, and brutally honest. A motorcycle had to survive changing surfaces, long climbs, high-speed sections, heat, stress, and the punishment of sustained riding. If a machine failed there, the failure was public. If it succeeded, the success carried a force no advertisement could match. From that point, Norton began building one of the strongest racing identities in British motorcycling. The company was not simply selling motorcycles. It was selling the idea that a road bike could carry something of the island inside it. A Norton badge on a petrol tank suggested seriousness. It suggested speed. It suggested that this was not a machine designed only to look impressive outside a showroom. It had been shaped by competition, danger, and mechanical discipline. By the 1930s, Norton's racing reputation had become formidable. Company histories describe the decade as one of dominance, with Norton winning 78 of 92 Grand Prix races and 7 of 9 Isle of Man TT victories. Even if the numbers belong partly to the language of company pride, the historical meaning is clear. Norton had become one of the great performance names of its age, but racing success can teach a dangerous lesson. It teaches a company to refine what already works. It rewards bravery, precision, and incremental improvement. It encourages engineers to chase the perfect version of an existing idea. What it does not always teach is how to respond when the customer changes, when the factory system changes, when the market asks a different question entirely. Norton's world was deeply mechanical. A Norton was not meant to disappear beneath the rider. It demanded attention. The engine had character. The gearbox needed respect. The carburetor, the frame, the vibration, the sound, and all of it reminded the rider that the machine was alive with moving. Parts that created loyalty. It also created a blind spot because, while Norton perfected the British motorcycle as an object of speed, feel, and mechanical intimacy, the wider world was moving towards something else. Riders still wanted performance, but they also wanted reliability. They wanted style, but they wanted convenience. They wanted excitement, but not necessarily oil leaks, hard starting, electrical trouble, and constant adjustment. For a time, Norton's answer was still engineering brilliance, and one of its finest answers was the Featherbed frame. Introduced in 1950 and associated with the McCandless brothers, the Featherbed transformed the way riders talked about handling. The name itself came from the sensation of riding it. A motorcycle with that frame could hold a line with remarkable confidence for its time. It gave the rider a feeling that power was not running away from the chassis. It was being controlled. To understand why this mattered, imagine a rider on a fast post-war road. The surface is uneven. The machine is accelerating. The rider feels the front wheel reading every scar in the tarmac. At that moment, the engine is only part of the story. The real question is whether the whole motorcycle can be trusted. A frame is not glamorous in the way a polished tank or a roaring exhaust is glamorous. But the frame decides whether speed becomes pleasure or fear. The Featherbed gave Norton something precious: trust at speed. It strengthened the company's identity as a maker of motorcycles that handled beautifully. It helped make Norton feel like a rider's brand, not merely a manufacturer's brand. The machine was not only powerful, it communicated. But while Norton refined the art of handling, the market was changing again. The post-war rider wanted more than racing purity. Competitors were pushing twin-cylinder machines that offered smoother power, broader appeal, and a more modern riding experience. Norton had built much of its glory around singles, but the road market was no longer shaped only by that tradition. The Model 7 Dominator, first seen at the 1948 Earl's Court Show, was Norton's answer to that new pressure. It was designed to compete with twin-cylinder rivals from firms such as Triumph, Ariel, and BSA. It showed that Norton could adapt, but it also revealed a tension that would follow the Hein company for decades. Norton was excellent at perfecting a machine. It was less comfortable when the whole industrial world around the machine demanded reinvention. By the 1960s, that problem became impossible to avoid. British motorcycles still carried enormous prestige. They had names that meant something: Norton, Triumph, BSA, Matchless, AJS. They had style, performance, racing heritage, and export appeal. In Britain, they were woven into the industrial landscape of the Midlands. Very broad, especially in America, they had an aura of rebellion and speed. But beneath that image, the old industry was weakening. Factories were fragmented. Investment was limited. Product development was slow. Management structures often belonged to an earlier industrial age. Models were stretched longer than they should have been. Customers were becoming less forgiving. And across the world, Japanese manufacturers were not just entering the market. They were changing the meaning of quality. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki did not simply compete by making motorcycles cheaper or faster. They made them easier to live with. Their bikes started more dependably. They leaked less. Their electrical systems were better. Their production quality was more consistent. Their designs felt modern not only because of styling, but because ownership itself became less demanding. That was the real threat. The Japanese manufacturers understood that the future motorcyclist might not want to become a part-time mechanic just to enjoy the ride. Norton's great answer for a time was the Commando, launched at the end of the 1960s. The Norton Commando became one of the last great icons of the old British motorcycle industry. It had presence. It had muscular styling. It had the kind of engine character that could make a rider remember it for the rest of his life. It also carried a clever solution to an old problem. The Atlas had suffered from vibration, and Norton's answer was the isolastic mounting system. Instead of creating an entirely new engine from the ground up, the company mounted the engine in a way that isolated much of the vibration from the rider. It was intelligent. It was also revealing. The isolastic system showed how much Norton was trying to stretch an older architecture into a new age. It solved a problem, but it did not erase the fact that the company was relying on evolution, where the market increasingly demanded transformation. The Commando debuted at Earl's Court in Chelsea, 1967, and became a celebrated machine, winning Machine of the Year for 5 consecutive years, according to Norton's own history. For enthusiasts, it was magnificent. For the company, it was a lifeline. For the old British industry, it was one last roar before the walls closed in. But a great motorcycle is not the same thing as a healthy manufacturer. That is the tragedy of the Commando. It proved that brilliance still existed inside Norton. It did not prove that the system around Norton could survive. A product can delay a reckoning. It cannot rebuild an industry by itself. As Norton moved through the late 1960s and early 1970s, the corporate story became increasingly tangled. Associated Motorcycles, which had owned Norton, fell into restructuring. Norton became part of Norton Villiers. Then, as the wider British motorcycle industry weakened, the government became involved in efforts to preserve what remained. In March 1973, the House of Commons discussed proposals involving manganese bronze, BSA and Norton Villiers. The plan pointed toward a new motorcycle company supported by public money, with ministers emphasizing exports, jobs, and the need for a British motorcycle industry that could still compete internationally. But the debate also revealed the anxiety beneath the rescue. This was not just about machines. It was about workers. It was about industrial pride. It was about whether Britain could keep hold of a sector that had once carried its reputation around the world. When a motorcycle factory declines, the loss is never limited to the assembly line. A whole ecosystem weakens with it. The small supplier making brackets or castings, the haulier moving parts between plants, the apprentice expecting to learn a trade, the toolmaker whose knowledge lived in his hands, the store's clerk, the tester, the draftsman, the families whose week followed the rhythm of factory hours. Even the streets around the works changed, when the gates no longer opened the same way. That is why industrial decline hurts more than a balance sheet can show. It removes continuity. The new Norton Villiers Triumph structure was supposed to gather strength from what remained, but consolidation is not the same as renewal. If the products are aging, if capital is short, if competitors are moving faster, and if the new organization is built under emergency pressure, a merger can become less a recovery plan than an organized retreat. The British government's 1975 Material on the Motorcycle Industry identified the crisis in relation to Japanese manufacturers entering the large motorcycle markets where British firms had once been stronger. That point matters. For a long time, British companies could believe they still owned the territory of big, fast, desirable motorcycles. Japanese manufacturers may have started with smaller machines in the public imagination, but they did not stay there. They moved upward. They entered the very market where Norton, Triumph, and BSA thought heritage and performance would protect them. Suddenly, the British firms were not competing against a single rival or a single model. They were competing against modern industrial systems. A Norton Commando had soul. But a customer standing in a showroom also had practical questions. Would it start easily? Would it leak? Would the lights work properly? Would the finish last? Could parts be supplied? Would the warranty mean something? Could the bike be ridden hard on Sunday and still be trusted on Monday morning? The old British industry often treated flaws as part of character. The new customer increasingly treated them as defects, That was a deep cultural change. A machine could still be charismatic, but charisma was no longer enough. Japanese manufacturers turned dependability into its own emotional promise. They did not only sell motorcycles that worked, they sold confidence. Norton could still make riders feel something. Its competitors were learning how to make them feel secure. That difference changed the market. By the mid-1970s, Norton's world was collapsing into receiverships, reorganizations, and smaller successor operations. The name did not vanish completely, but the old continuity was broken. The company that had grown from Birmingham workshops, racing victories, post-war engineering, and skilled factory culture no longer existed. In the same way, what remained was heritage, and heritage is powerful, but heritage is not the same as a living industrial system. This is where the Norton story becomes more complicated than a simple rise and fall. Some companies disappear cleanly. Their factories close. Their products stop. Their names fade into trade journals, auction catalogs, and the memories of specialists. Norton did not fade so easily. The badge kept pulling people back. To say Norton was to summon black and silver racers, Isle of Man roads, featherbed frames, Dominators, Commandos, cafe races, workshop pride, and a kind of British motorcycle romance that many riders did not want to let go. That emotional power gave the name commercial value. It also created danger, because when a company trades heavily on the past, customers expect more than a product. They expect a resurrection. They want the new machine to repair the wound left by the old collapse. That is an enormous burden for any revived brand. In 2009, Stuart Garner incorporated Norton Motorcycle Holdings to acquire the Norton Motorcycle brand and invest in a UK manufacturing plant. The revival at Donington gave enthusiasts hope. Norton, it seemed, might become more than a badge again. It might once more become a British manufacturer with real bikes, real workers, and a real future. For people who loved the name, that mattered. A revived Norton promised continuity. It suggested that the old story had not ended in decline after all. Perhaps the badge could still belong to a living factory rather than a museum wall. Perhaps the sound could return, but the revival became entangled in scandal and collapse. The pensions. Regulator later described Garner's control of Norton-related companies and the creation of pension schemes in 2012. Reporting by The Guardian stated that more than 200 people were affected by a pensions liberation fraud, with about 11.5 million transferred out of retirement plans and 9.4 million eventually paid in compensation. More than a decade later, this chapter is painful because it shows how heritage can attract belief. People wanted Norton to succeed. Customers wanted it. Workers wanted it. Enthusiasts wanted it. Investors and supporters wanted to believe that the name still had a future. But belief is not governance. Romance is not a business model. A famous badge does not protect people from financial misconduct, poor controls, weak execution, or the hard demands of manufacturing. In 2020, Norton entered another chapter when TVS Motor Company acquired certain assets of Norton Motorcycles UK Limited, which was in administration, in an all-cash deal worth $16 million. TVS described Norton as one of Britain's most iconic sporting motorcycle names and spoke of returning the brand to international strength. This moment changed the meaning of Norton again. For some, foreign ownership of such a British name felt like another kind of loss. But that reaction, however understandable, misses the harder lesson of the company's history. Norton did not decline because outsiders failed to respect it. It declined because admiration could not compensate for underinvestment, unstable structures, aging designs, and a market that had moved on. If Norton is to survive now, it needs more than memory. It needs capital. It needs modern engineering discipline. It needs quality control, supply chains, compliance knowledge, emissions expertise, professional management, and motorcycles that can stand in a global premium market without asking buyers to forgive them in advance. That is the irony at the center of the modern Norton. To preserve the emotional power of the name, the company may have to operate in a way that is less romantic than the legend suggests. The new Norton can speak the language of heritage. It can honor the Commando, the Featherbed, the TT victories, and the Birmingham origins. But it has to live by the standards of the present. Its motorcycles will be judged not only by the curve of the tank or the sound of the exhaust, but by whether they are built consistently, supported properly, and worthy of the price their badge demands. Today, Norton does not compete only with the ghosts of old Triumph. BSA, Matchless, and AJS. It competes with Ducati, BMW, modern Triumph, Japanese performance machines, and a global premium market where heritage is everywhere but excellence is still rare. A badge can open the door, it cannot keep the customer, and yet Norton still matters. It matters because industrial stories are not only about profit, failure, and ownership. They are about national confidence, local skill, design judgment, and the emotional life of machines. A motorcycle is intimate in a way many products are not. The rider feels the engine through the body. The machine becomes attached to memory, a first ride, a dangerous bend, a father's garage, a photograph from youth, a weekend road, a sound that never fully leaves. Norton's tragedy is that it possessed so much of what cannot easily be. Manufactured identity, romance, racing history, a name riders remembered. What it lacked at crucial moments was what every manufacturer eventually needs: the ability to renew itself before the market forces renewal upon it. The fall of Norton was never caused by one decision. It was a layered decline, aging designs, limited investment, corporate instability, a British industry slow to respond to Japanese production power, customers who became less tolerant of inconvenience. Later, a revival damaged by scandal and financial failure. But Norton's survival as a name tells us something too. Some industrial symbols are too meaningful to disappear cleanly. They return because people keep wanting them to return. The unresolved question is whether the return is real or only decorative. A real return is not a logo placed on a tank. It is a factory culture capable of earning trust again. The old Norton was built from Birmingham metal, racing risk, post-war engineering, and the hands of workers who knew that a motorcycle was not merely assembled, it was listened to, adjusted, felt. The modern Norton must be built differently. It needs digital design, modern manufacturing, global purchasing, regulatory discipline, emissions knowledge, and the patience to deliver machines that match both the price and the promise of the name. But somewhere inside those modern requirements, the old question remains: can a machine carry a memory without being trapped by it? That is Norton's challenge now. Not simply to honor the past, but to escape being imprisoned by it. Not to recreate the Commando as a museum piece, but to understand why the Commando mattered. It mattered because, for one last moment, it made British motorcycling feel alive. At the edge of collapse, the story of Norton is not the story of a company that failed because it stopped making beautiful motorcycles. It is the story of a company that made beautiful motorcycles in a world where beauty was no longer enough, and that is why the name still has power. Norton reminds us that industry is never only about products. It is about timing, systems, workers, roads, customers, capital, pride, and the hard truth that even legends must keep earning the right to continue. In the end, Norton did not disappear, but the Norton that survived is not the same Norton that began in a Birmingham workshop. It carries the same name, the same script, the same burden of expectation, but it now stands in a different century, under different ownership, surrounded by a different industrial reality. The old factories have fallen silent. The old certainties are gone. The British motorcycle industry that once seemed permanent has become a landscape of restorations, revived names, surviving memories, and a few companies that learned how to reinvent themselves before it was too late. But when a Norton badge still appears on a tank, it carries all of that history with it. The first workshop, the TT roads, the Featherbed frame, the Commando's last roar, the mergers, the scandals, the rescue, and the unresolved hope that a great industrial name can still become more than a memory. That is the weight of Norton motorcycles. Not just speed, not just nostalgia, a warning cast in metal that the past can inspire a company, but it cannot save it by itself. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more forgotten factories, lost industries, and the hidden histories behind them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps us keep these stories alive.